The rain hammered against my apartment window like accusations I couldn't escape. I stood there, mascara-stained tears mixing with the drops sliding down the glass, watching the city lights blur into watercolor smears of regret. My phone buzzed for the 100th time. Simon Johnson, again. I couldn't bring myself to answer, not after what I just discovered. Not after I'd finally understood that the man I'd built my entire world around had never truly seen me at all. Let me take you back to where this mess began. 6 months ago, when I was still stupid enough to believe in fairy tales. My name is Susan Davidson, and I was 32 years old when I fell catastrophically in love with my university professor. I know what you're thinking. Cliché, right? The lonely graduate student falling for the brilliant, unattainable academic. But it wasn't like that. At least, I didn't think it was. I'd returned to university later than most, pursuing my master's in art history. After spending my 20s in a series of dead-end relationships and deader-end jobs, my ex-boyfriend Raymond had drained me financially, emotionally, spiritually. 2 years of watching him chase get-rich-quick schemes while I paid the rent, cooked his meals, and listened to his endless promises that next time would be different. When I finally left Raymond, I was broken, and 31 years old with nothing to show for my adult life, except a collection of heartaches and an overdrawn bank account. The university scholarship felt like a lifeline, a chance to restart, to become someone worthy of respect. That's when I met Professor Simon Johnson. He walked into the lecture hall that first day like he owned not just the room, but the entire concept of knowledge itself. Tall, with silver threading through his dark hair, wire-rimmed glasses that somehow made him look both intellectual and devastatingly handsome. He was 38, recently divorced, and rumored to be one of the youngest professors ever tenured at the institution. Art isn't about what you see, he'd said that first day, his voice rich and measured. It's about what refuses to be seen. The negative space, the silence between brush strokes. That's where truth lives. I was captivated. Over the following months, I attended every lecture, participated in every discussion. I told myself it was academic dedication. I was just a committed student, nothing more. But late at night, I'd replay our conversations. The way he paused when reading my essay on Renaissance symbolism, looked up at me with those intense gray eyes, and said, "Miss Davidson, you see things others miss. That's a rare gift." I started staying after class, asking questions I'd carefully prepared the night before. Our discussions would stretch from minutes into hours. He'd recommend books, obscure artists, hidden galleries. I'd devour everything, hungry not just for knowledge, but for his approval, his attention, his rare smiles. "You're different from other students," he told me once, during one of our extended office hours. Rain pattered against his office window. It was always raining in my memories of him. "You don't just study art, you feel it." My heart had soared, but he'd said nothing more, just returned to grading papers while I sat across from him, drowning in feelings I couldn't name and didn't dare speak. Then Raymond came back. He showed up at my apartment on a Tuesday night, 3 months into the semester. I almost didn't recognize him. The man who'd once been content in wrinkled t-shirts and yesterday's ambitions now wore an expensive suit, drove a Mercedes, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd finally found his lottery ticket. "Susan." He smiled that charming smile that had once made me weak. "I know I don't deserve even 5 minutes of your time, but please, just hear me out." I should have closed the door, but I'd been raised to be polite, to give people chances, to believe everyone deserved redemption. "Biggest mistake of my life. I've changed," Raymond said, settling onto my threadbare couch like he belonged there. "I started a tech company. We just secured Series B funding $30 million. Susan, I'm worth more than I ever dreamed possible. He pulled out his phone, showed me articles, Forbes features, Business Insider interviews. It was all real. Raymond Royalty, yes. That was his actual surname. And yes, he'd spent our entire relationship making jokes about how he'd make the name Prophetic had somehow stumbled into the exact success he'd always chased. I've thought about you every single day, he continued, his hand reaching for mine. I was too shocked to pull away. You believed in me when no one else did. You supported me through everything. I was a fool to take you for granted, but I want to make it right. Let me show you the life we could have had, the life we can still have. He painted pictures with words, penthouses, travel, security. Everything I'd struggled without, everything I'd convinced myself didn't matter while I ate ramen and wore thrift store clothes and pretended my grad student stipend was enough. Just come to dinner, he pressed. One dinner. If you still hate me after, I'll never bother you again. I agreed. Not because I wanted him back, I told myself, but because I was curious. Because some petty part of me wanted to see him grovel. Because the girl who'd sacrificed everything for him deserved to watch him finally acknowledge her value. The dinner was at the city's most exclusive restaurant, where reservations required 6-month waitlists and connections I didn't possess. Raymond ordered champagne I couldn't pronounce, food I couldn't identify. He told stories of his success with the practiced ease of someone who'd told them 100 times. None of it means anything without you, he said, his eyes intense across the candlelight. I'm empty, Susan. All this wealth, this success, it's hollow. Because the woman who made me believe I could become this man isn't beside me. I felt nothing. That was the shocking part. This man I'd once loved desperately, I felt absolutely nothing. But when I returned to campus the next day, something had shifted. Professor Johnson Simon seemed distant during our usual after-class discussions. His responses were clipped, professional. The warmth I'd come to crave had vanished like morning fog. Is everything all right? I finally asked after a particularly cold exchange about my thesis proposal. He looked at me over his glasses, and for a moment, I saw something flash in his eyes. Pain, anger, but it was gone before I could identify it. Miss Davidson, I think perhaps we've been too informal in our interactions. It's important to maintain appropriate professional boundaries. I hope you understand. The words hit me like a slap. Miss Davidson, after months of Susan and shared coffee and conversations that felt like confessions, I stumbled through some response and fled his office, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall until I reached the bathroom. What had I done wrong? The answer came a week later, delivered like a poison arrow to the heart. I was in the campus coffee shop, reviewing notes for my thesis, when I overheard two professors at the next table. I wouldn't have paid attention except I heard his name. Did you see Simon Johnson's face when he found out? Susan Davidson is back with Raymond Royalty, Professor Mitchell said, his voice carrying that particular tone of academic gossip. My blood froze. Oh, the billionaire? Professor Victor responded. Yes, apparently they're quite serious. Someone saw them at dinner last week. Looked very romantic. Poor Simon, I think he actually had feelings for her. Well, he waited too long. Can't blame the girl for choosing money over a struggling academic salary. She's practical, at least. Still, I wonder if she knew. He's been pining for months. Everyone could see it except apparently her. I sat paralyzed, my coffee growing cold, their words echoing in my skull. Simon had feelings for me. Had feelings. Past tense. And somehow, through some terrible game of telephone and assumption, The entire university thought I was dating Raymond. I wanted to run to Simon's office immediately, to explain, to fix this horrible misunderstanding. But pride stopped me, and fear. Because what if I was wrong? What if those professors were mistaken? What if I threw myself at him only to face rejection? To make everything infinitely worse? So I did nothing. I let the misunderstanding fester like an infected wound. Raymond, meanwhile, intensified his campaign. Flowers arrived at my apartment. Expensive gifts I couldn't accept, but felt guilty returning. Text messages filled with memories and promises. I've changed, Susan. Give me one more chance to prove it. And because I was confused, hurting from Simon's sudden coldness, and tired of struggling financially, I made the second biggest mistake of my life. I said yes, not to marriage, not even to love, but to trying again, to seeing where it could go. Raymond was different, I told myself. He'd matured. He had resources now, stability. Maybe this time would be different. The first month was intoxicating. He rented us a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He bought me clothes, jewelry, everything I'd done without for years. He attended every university event with me, his arm around my waist, showing me off like a prize he'd finally won. But I felt hollow, because every time I walked past Simon's office, every time I saw him in the hallways and he looked through me like I was invisible, a piece of my soul crumbled. I tried to convince myself I'd made the right choice, that I was being practical, mature, that choosing security over impossible dreams was what adults did. Then came the night I discovered the truth. Raymond had been working late, or so he claimed. I'd stayed home from a university fundraiser, nursing a headache that was probably psychosomatic guilt. His laptop sat open on the Kit Victor counter, still logged into his email. I wasn't snooping, not intentionally, but an email notification popped up, and the preview made my blood run cold. I can't wait to see you tonight. The usual place. Don't worry, she suspects nothing. My hands shook as I clicked open his full inbox. What I found destroyed me. Months of emails, months of affairs, multiple women, escorts, colleagues. One message was time-stamped from the very night. He'd taken me to that expensive dinner and begged for another chance. There were messages about me too, to his business partner. Susan's the perfect cover, respectable, academic, makes me look settled. Plus, having a beautiful girlfriend on my arm helps with investors. They trust family men. To one of his mistresses, she's temporary, just until the board approves my CEO position. Then I can trade up. I sat on the cold marble floor of our ridiculous penthouse and sobbed. Not because I loved Raymond, I'd realized weeks ago that I didn't, but because I'd betrayed myself. I'd chosen comfort over truth. I'd chosen the easy path over the terrifying possibility of real love. And I destroyed whatever chance I might have had with Simon. The rain started again, because of course it did. The universe had a cruel sense of poetic timing. I packed my things that night. 3 suitcases holding everything that actually mattered: books, my laptop, the ratty sweater I'd worn through graduate school. I left the jewelry, the designer clothes, everything Raymond's money had bought. I left a note on the counter. I know everything. We're done. Don't contact me again. Then I walked out into the rain with nowhere to go and nothing but my dignity. Finally intact. I ended up at my friend Maria's apartment, soaking wet and emotionally shattered. She took one look at me and pulled me inside without questions. He was cheating, I said simply. The whole time. I was so stupid. You weren't stupid, Maria said fiercely, wrapping me in a blanket and putting on tea. You were hopeful. There's a difference. I spent that night on her couch, staring at the ceiling. replaying every moment of the last 6 months, every sign I'd missed with Raymond, every moment I'd misread with Simon. By morning, I'd made a decision. I was done being invisible, done being underestimated, done letting fear and insecurity dictate my choices. I had 1 semester left before finishing my master's degree. I would complete it with dignity. I would write the best thesis the department had ever seen. And then I would move forward with my life, with or without anyone's approval. But first, I needed to clear the air with Simon. Not for romance, I'd abandoned that hope, but for truth, because I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I'd only been brave enough to speak. I showed up at his office hours the next afternoon. My heart hammered as I knocked, and when his voice called, "Come in," I almost lost my nerve. He looked up from his desk, and for a moment, I saw raw emotion flash across his face before he masked it with professional courtesy. "Miss Davidson, what can I do for you?" "I'm not with Raymond," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I was never really with him. He came back after we broke up 2 years ago, and I made the mistake of giving him another chance. But I left him last night after discovering he'd been cheating on me since the day he showed up at my door. Simon sat very still, his expression unreadable. I continued, words flowing like a dam had burst. "I heard professors talking in the coffee shop. They said you had feelings for me, past tense. And I need you to know that if that was ever true, I never knew. I thought my crush was one-sided. I thought you saw me as just another student. And when you suddenly became cold, I didn't understand why. And I made terrible choices because I was confused and hurt and stupid." Silence filled the office. Rain drummed against the window. Finally, Simon removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. When he looked at me again, the professional mask had cracked. "Susan, my name, finally. You're not stupid. You're brilliant and talented, and you deserve someone who sees that." "Who sees you? Do you?" The question slipped out, barely a whisper. "See me, I mean?" He stood, walked around his desk, but kept a careful distance between us. Professional boundaries. "Even now, I saw you the first day you walked into my lecture hall," he said quietly. "You sat in the 3rd row, left side. You wore a green cardigan and you took notes by hand instead of on a laptop. And when I talked about negative space, you smiled like you understood something everyone else had missed." My breath caught. "I've spent 6 months trying to ignore what I felt," he continued. "Because you're my student, because I'm your professor, because there are rules for very good reasons. And then I heard you were with Raymond royalty. And I thought I'd waited too long, been too cautious, and lost my chance." "You didn't lose your chance," I said. "You never had a chance to lose because I never knew you wanted one. I should have told you, should have been braver. But Susan, the power dynamic." "I graduate in 4 months," I interrupted. "Would the power dynamic still matter then?" Something shifted in his expression. "Hope, maybe. Or possibility." "No," he said slowly. "In 4 months, you'll be a colleague, an equal, someone I could ask to dinner without violating every ethical standard I hold sacred." "4 months," I repeated, my heart racing. "That's not so long. It's an eternity," he said, but he was almost smiling. "But I've waited this long. I suppose I can wait a bit longer, if you're asking me to wait, that is." "I'm asking," I said, "if you're willing." "Susan Davidson, I would wait years if that's what it took." We stood there in his office, rain streaming down the windows, not touching but connected by something more powerful than physical contact, understanding, truth. The promise of something real once all the obstacles cleared. "I should go," I finally said, "before we do something that violates those ethical standards you mentioned." "Probably wise." But neither of us moved. For months, I said again. 123 days, he replied. But who's counting? I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. You are, apparently. I'm a professor. Precision is my job. I left his office with a lightness I hadn't felt since before. Raymond came back into my life. The path forward was clear now. For months of focus, dedication, and the best academic work of my life. And then ... possibility. The next few weeks were transformative. I threw myself into my thesis with renewed passion. My topic, the invisible women, marginalized female artists of the Renaissance, took on new meaning. I wasn't just writing about forgotten artists. I was writing about being unseen, overlooked, underestimated, about finally claiming space and demanding recognition. Simon maintained perfect professional distance during lectures and office hours. But sometimes I'd catch him watching me with an expression that made my heart race. And once, when I turned in a chapter of my thesis, he'd written in the margins, "Brilliant work, worth waiting for." I knew he meant the thesis, but I also knew he didn't. Raymond tried contacting me, of course. Dozens of calls, texts, emails. They evolved from apologetic to angry to desperate. I blocked him everywhere and focused on reclaiming the life I'd almost thrown away. Then, 2 months into my liberation, everything changed again. I was leaving the library late one evening when I found Simon waiting by the entrance, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. "This is highly irregular," he said without preamble. "But there's something you need to know, and I can't wait 2 more months to tell you." My heart hammered. Okay ... double quotes. Raymond Royalty has been contacting the department. He's been telling people that you stole money from him, that you're unstable, that your thesis work is questionable. He's trying to damage your reputation and possibly get you expelled. Rage, white hot and clarifying, flooded through me. He's lying. I know, but Susan, he has resources, lawyers, connections. The department chair is taking his claims seriously. What do I do? Simon handed me a folder. I've been documenting everything. Every excellent paper you've written. Every discussion where you've demonstrated exceptional knowledge. Letters of recommendation from other professors. And I've been making some calls. It turns out Raymond Royalty has made these kinds of accusations before, against other women who've left him. There's a pattern. I stared at him, overwhelmed. You did this for me? I'm doing this because it's right, because you deserve to be protected from malicious lies. And yes, because he stopped himself. Because in 2 months, I plan to ask you to dinner. And I'd prefer if you weren't expelled before then. Despite everything, I smiled. Practical, always. What do I need to do? Fight? Document everything. Don't engage with him directly. But don't hide either. Be visible. Let your work speak for itself. And trust that truth has a way of surfacing. The next 6 weeks were a nightmare. Raymond escalated his campaign, somehow convincing a board member and investor in his company to pressure the university. There were meetings, investigations. My thesis defense moved up to scrutinize my work more carefully. But I didn't break. I'd been invisible for too long. This time, I would be seen. My thesis defense was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. The committee room filled with professors, including Simon, who sat in the back maintaining appropriate professional distance, but whose presence gave me strength. I presented my work months of research on forgotten female artists, women whose talents had been attributed to male contemporaries, whose brilliance had been systematically erased by history. These women were invisible not because they lacked talent, I concluded, but because the systems around them refused to see them. But invisibility isn't permanent. truth persists. And eventually, if we're brave enough to look, we find what was always there, waiting to be acknowledged. The committee asked questions, tough ones, fair ones. I answered with confidence born from genuine knowledge and hard work. When it was over, the committee chair smiled. Miss Davidson, this is exceptional work. Your thesis is approved with highest honors. Congratulations, you've earned your master's degree. The room erupted in applause. I looked at Simon, and the pride in his eyes was worth every struggle. After the room cleared, he approached me, carefully professional, but unable to completely hide his emotion. Congratulations, Miss Davidson. Though I suppose it's just Susan now that you're no longer my student. Just Susan sounds perfect. Are you free for dinner tonight? Because I've been counting down for months, and I don't think I can wait another day. I laughed, tears of joy and relief streaming down my face. I'm free. I'm finally free. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant. Nothing fancy, just authentic and warm. We talked for hours, not as professor and student, but as equals. He told me about his divorce, how his ex-wife had resented his dedication to teaching, how he'd buried himself in work to avoid loneliness. I told him about Raymond, about feeling invisible my entire life, about learning to see my own worth. You were never invisible to me, Simon said, reaching across the table to take my hand. From that first day, you were the brightest thing in the room. You hit it well. Professional ethics. They matter. They do, I agreed. Thank you for respecting them. Even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. We dated slowly, carefully, building something real on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine connection. He introduced me to his world art galleries, academic conferences, quiet evenings with books and wine. I brought spontaneity to his structured life, reminded him that joy didn't always require planning. 3 months after my graduation, I was offered a position at a prestigious museum in the city. The pay was good, the work meaningful, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt successful on my own terms. Raymond tried one final time to destroy me. He showed up at the museum's opening night, drunk and belligerent, shouting about how I'd used him and destroyed his reputation. Security removed him quickly, but not before Simon stepped between us, his voice cold and hard in a way I'd never heard. You've harassed Susan for the last time. I have documentation of every lie you've spread, every law you've broken. Leave now, and I won't press charges. Stay, and I'll make sure every business publication knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Raymond looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the pathetic truth. He'd never loved me. He'd loved the idea of me, the trophy, the validation. But he'd never actually seen me at all. You're not worth it, he spat, but there was defeat in his voice. You're right, I said calmly. I'm not worth your lies or manipulation or abuse. I'm worth so much more. He left, and I never saw him again. 1 year later, Simon and I stood in front of that same Renaissance painting we discussed in his office so long ago. The museum had acquired it for a special exhibition I'd curated. Look at the negative space, I said, echoing his words from that first lecture. The silence between brush strokes. That's where truth lies, he finished, wrapping his arm around my waist. I used to think I was negative space, I admitted. The silence, the overlooked part of the picture. And now I know I was never invisible. I was just looking for someone who knew how to see. He turned me to face him, his gray eyes soft and certain. I see you, Susan Davidson. I've always seen you, and I'd like to keep seeing you for the rest of my life, if you'll let me. He pulled out a small velvet box, and my heart stopped. This isn't how I planned this, he said, smiling nervously. I had a whole speech prepared about symbolism, and art and finding beauty in unexpected places. But standing here with you, in front of a painting that represents everything we've overcome, I realize the truth is simple. I love you. Will you marry me? I looked at this man who'd waited for me, who'd protected me, who'd seen me when I couldn't see myself. I thought about the girl I'd been a year ago, broken, invisible, convinced her worth was tied to someone else's validation. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her value, who'd fought for her dreams, who'd learned that being seen started with seeing yourself. Yes, I said, tears streaming down my face. Yes, absolutely yes. He slipped the ring on my finger, simple, elegant, perfect. Around us, museum visitors applauded, drawn by the obvious romance of the moment. But I barely noticed them, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about being invisible or overlooked or underestimated. I was exactly where I belonged, with someone who'd proven that real love isn't about grand gestures or wealth or power. It's about patience, truth, and finally being brave enough to be seen. 5 years later, I published my first book, an expansion of my thesis that became a bestseller in academic circles. Simon got promoted to department chair. We bought a small house with a large garden and filled it with art, books, and eventually, a daughter we named Grace. Sometimes I think about Raymond, though not often. I heard he got married to an heiress and divorced within a year. I heard his company went bankrupt due to fraud charges. I heard he tried to blame everyone but himself. I don't take satisfaction in his failures. I just feel grateful I escaped before I became another casualty of his selfishness. More often, I think about the woman I was, the one who thought she had to choose between love and self-respect, between security and truth, between being seen and being safe. I teach a class now at the university where Simon and I met, Women in Art History, and on the first day, I always tell my students the same thing. You are not negative space. You are not silence. You are not invisible. And anyone who treats you like you are doesn't deserve access to your brilliance. The right person won't make you choose between being loved and being seen. The right person will do both, simply because they can't imagine doing anything else. And then I look at Simon, who sometimes sits in on my lectures, just like I once sat in on his. And I see him smile, because we both know the best love stories aren't about finding someone to complete you. They're about finding someone who sees you completely and loves exactly what they find. If you watch this far, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, share, and drop a comment. Bye.